Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Poland heads into a closely watched presidential runoff that could shape its direction on key issues such as EU policy and relations with the United States. Now, in a recent debate, Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski and conservative historian Karol Nawrocki offered contrasting views on Europe, security, and national priorities. Joining us today on TVP World to help make sense of it all is Jakub Jaraczewski, research coordinator at Democracy Reporting International. With a background in EU law and democratic governance, he brings us his perspective on what this election could mean for Poland's political landscape. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you very much for having me. Welcome.
So we are looking at a historical turnout, a number that has been seen since the 1990s when Poland first got the right to vote. What does this reveal about some of the deep political polarization in Poland today?
No, I think that the increasing turnout, we've seen a record turnout during the 2023 parliamentary election, and we are looking at a rather solid, hopefully, turnout in the second round of presidential elections now, is a sign that despite the polarization, more and more people in Poland are interested in politics and they feel like their vote counts. Poland and actually most of the countries in the Central and Eastern European region have gone through the 2000s and 2010s period of some 20 years of political democratic marasm with elections featuring very low turnout, with a lot of conclusions from political sciences that there is a waning interest in democratic processes and people are simply not turning out to vote. But we are now seeing this trend reverse. We've seen a huge turnout in Romania during the recent presidential elections and now also in Poland. So the polarization, it exists and it is definitely a problem. However, separately from that, we're seeing a rather encouraging trend of more and more people believing that their vote matters.
Right. It's probably a good sign of good faith in the Polish democratic process. Now, one of the also interesting phenomena in the first round of election is, well, of course, outside of the two traditional mainstream candidates, we'll also see a very large showing for third-party candidates. Do you think that this also is a good sign, especially with the younger voters, that maybe they are also a little bit fed up with the traditional two-party politics?
I am kind of two minds when it comes to the strong performance from voters beyond the top two in the Polish elections. On the one hand, it is encouraging that the politics in Poland are not getting entirely polarized between the two camps, the centrist and the conservative right-wing camp, and that people are choosing other candidates. This is good. It's showing that this, despite the efforts from politicians to divide the country into two starkly different camps, that is not working and people are looking for different options. However, at the same time, one thing which cannot be understated is that a lot of this third-party support in this presidential election has been for candidates of far and extreme right. The left-wing candidates have gathered much less support than initially anticipated. And we've seen a complete surprise of the extremist xenophobic candidate Grzegorz Braun coming in as fourth. And this is worrying news. This seems like for a significant part of new voters, for young people, it's the far right and extreme right that offer answers to their questions and solutions to their problems.
Right, you mentioned, like you said, there's a kind of a surprise turnout for candidates such as Grzegorz Braun. And we also see that repeated in various other elections across Europe where there's a strong tendency for these kind of right-wing parties to outperform their polls. Why is it so hard to pin down their support when it comes to the polling before the elections?
I think this might be down to a couple of factors. I think that one factor is, of course, the recognized issue with voters who choose to support extreme ends of the political spectrum, be it right-wing or left-wing or in any other form, placing themselves at the far ends, being reluctant to admit to that they will be voting for candidates who have extremely strong views in one direction or another one. But I also think that this is part of a larger trend which we have seen in the region. There is an increased support for far-right candidates who marry the anti-establishment message, where they claim that in the event of victory, they will upend the stale table of domestic politics, and they will remove the parties who have been in power since a long time and who have shared this country. And also at the same time, those far-right movements fuse this rhetoric with anti-migration, questioning the European Union and NATO as alliances, and the traditional and attacking the traditional centrist liberal democratic establishment. And it all comes together into a combination which is extremely difficult to capture, especially in a situation where this support frequently is strongly based in young people, and the pollsters and political analysts who work on this are inevitably frequently from the older generation. And sometimes, and at least this is my feeling looking from the side of it, they fail to capture the zeitgeist of the younger people.
Right, and speaking of an anti-establishment vote, do you think the conservative Karol Nawrocki's Eurosceptic stance is also contributing to that anti-establishment narrative, and perhaps that was what it eventually gave him a little bit legs up when it comes to outperforming his polling numbers?
No, PiS in general has been for a long time running on the message of being an anti-establishment party, a party that is challenging the centrist, center-left, center-right mainstays of Polish politics, and who are looking to upend. The thing is that, paradoxically, while PiS at the same time is broadcasting an anti-establishment message, it is a party which has been in power for 8 years. Andrzej Duda, who is the outgoing president of Poland, is also close tied to PiS and used to be a member of that party. And PiS over those 8 years has created an establishment of itself, and we have seen this establishment during their governance, and we have seen this establishment now trying hard to protect their positions and not let themselves be removed. However, still, despite the fact they are able to sell the message that the PiS is the party which is going to flip the table and which is going to upend the politics and was going to break through a certain status quo. It is a testament to their skill at political messaging, certainly. But if you scratch the surface a little bit and you see how things have played out over the last 8 years, this is very much a party which wants to establish its own establishment and has already done so.
Right, and speaking of the current president being from a different party from the prime minister, do you think that going forward, a divided government and presidency could work in today's geopolitical climate, or will you expect any form of gridlock?
Unfortunately, I believe that the ideas behind the division of executive power between the prime minister and the government on the one hand and the president on the other, which were crafted in Poland in the 90s and were very much a product of the then existing political scene and ambitions of political leaders of that day, is very poorly standing the test of time. There is a very real possibility that if the presidential elections will result in a competing political powers holding the office of president and the prime minister, Poland may well enter into a gridlock. This is going to be a situation where the idea of a cohabitation of some sort of working across the aisle and some sort of joint responsibility for the country, which were all very much in the minds of the drafters of the Polish constitution, might simply fail to operate in a such polarized environment and with such strong winner-takes-it-all mentality being displayed by key political players. So unfortunately, I feel like this election could very well result in a failure of the system to stand the test of time.
All right, now speaking of this very pivotal election, a lot is at stake here. How might this outcome impact Poland's stance when it comes to Ukraine, both militarily and politically?
Well, I think that this election shows us a lot. And one thing it shows us is that support for Ukraine has been a very much an item not only of foreign politics of Poland, but also domestic politics of Poland. And we have seen this play out over the last few months with multiple candidates in one way or another distancing themselves from Ukraine or from support for Ukrainian refugees. I think that is one element of Polish foreign policy which has been insofar and has been displayed by all the previous Polish presidents, Lech Kaczyński, Bronisław Komorowski, Aleksander Kwaśniewski, Andrzej Duda as well, which was an unwavering support for Ukraine and its NATO ambitions. This will also be tested now because ultimately after over 3 years of war and Poland hosting millions of Ukrainian refugees and migrants, there is a visible fatigue in the society, and this fatigue is being played out during these presidential elections with multiple candidates presenting ideas such as the one of Sławomir Mencen, to claim openly that Poland will block Ukraine's accession to NATO. So I think that still it is very much a matter of Polish security to ensure that Russia fails in its war against Ukraine, and Ukraine receives all of the support. But you can see the fatigue, and you can see that there is entirely possible scenario in which, following this presidential election, within the Polish executive power, we will have a government which will be still supporting Ukraine and a president who will be distanced from the idea in one way or another.
Right, and speaking of Vincent, now we are seeing both party candidates trying to court the parties of voters that has voted kind of third party in the first round, and this is not a very small number. We're seeing like a combined total of more than 20% just for the far right candidates. Do you think that eventually we might see the overturn window shift, that either candidate win the election because of having to court the far right voters, the entire kind of political system won't be able to hold the center?
I think that the far right in Poland currently is definitely kind of a disruptor of the politics and plays an extremely important role, not the least because of the significant support for Sławomir Mencen and for the fact that both candidates, Nawrocki and Trzaskowski, they simply cannot ignore that. And we've seen this play over the last week with Nawrocki enthusiastically embracing the support of Mencen and signing up for a list of demands from Mencen, and now with Trzaskowski, who refused to endorse those positions, but has engaged and has met with Mencen. It is, I think, impossible to fully ignore those voters because they represent a significant slice of Polish society which is frustrated with how things have been going with the country. But it's also not homogeneous. The voters of Confederacja and Mencen are people with far-right views. Those are people with libertarian views who don't feel that strongly about social issues, but very strongly about economy and taxes. Yeah. And there are also various other people, for example, those who simply seek an anti-establishment candidate with biggest chance of winning, and they see Mencen as such person. So I think that despite that fact that this might be difficult to accept for many liberal and centrist voters in Poland, the candidates will engage with the far right one or another, and they would be frankly unwise not to do that. Those are people who deserve to be heard and deserve to be engaged with, even if there is ultimately no agreement between the centrist candidates such as Trzaskowski and the far right.
All right, so a lot is at stake here, but in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight, and thanks for being with us on TVP World. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.